For the first lesson, we'll be going over Chapter 1 from the textbook. Chapter 1 will be discussing active learning. Now you may ask, what is active learning? Well, it's a process you must choose to participate in. The word active itself means you must be engaged in the process. If you're not paying attention, if you're not trying, you're not actively learning. Now, in order to do active learning effectively, it requires a lot of concentration and attention to detail. It's not enough to sit and listen, because it's really easy to zone out. Attention to detail requires a concerted effort on your part. In order to manage your active learning, there are a few things that you have to manage as well. Yourself, as in the amount of time that you commit to it, the assignment/learning task, which would be the attention that you devote to what you're doing, and many others as well. Now, active learning has a lot to do with the brain. You might ask, what exactly could it have to do with the brain? Well, cognitive psychology happens to be the body of knowledge that describes how the mind works, or at least how experts think it works. It can't actually be seen, but you could compare it to a computer. Now, neuroscience, on the other hand, not to be confused with cognitive psychology, is the scientific study of the molecular and cellular levels of the nervous system and of systems within the brain. Changes in the brain can be viewed both physical, emotional, and cognitive. It is, in essence, the biology of the brain. Now, when you think about active learning, it sounds a little bit busy, right? Something that most of us engage in on a regular basis is multitasking. A lot of us are what we like to call multitaskers. But we have to ask ourselves the question, is it really good for us? Is divided attention effective? Now, there's a trade-off, and you have to keep that in mind. Anytime you're going to divide your attention, you have to give something else up in order to be able to focus on more than one thing at a time. You're going to have less attention to both tasks, and you're going to be less efficient for completing those tasks. So always ask yourself this question before you choose to engage in multitasking. Can you really afford to be distracted? How is that actually going to affect your active learning? Now, you hear about things like learning styles all the time. Okay? What does it really mean? What can it do for you? Well, if you know what kind of a learning style that you have, it can help you decide how to study. It can help you look at what's going to best benefit you. Now, there are many different cognitive learning styles, and I have just a few listed here. Okay? You have the extroverted individual. I myself, for example, am definitely an extrovert. Extroverts like to talk, they like to interact, they like to be busy, they like to be right in the middle in the thick of things. Now, introverts, on the other hand, have a tendency to talk a little less. Usually they think things through in their mind rather than talk them through. They may be less willing to interact in large groups or with new people, whereas extroverted people typically don't have any kind of problem doing that. Now, you might ask which one's better, an extrovert or an introvert. Well, there's not really one better than the other. It's just a difference in personality type and in learning style. You also have sensing individuals, those that work with concrete details, very patient, very practical, they're realistic. On the other hand, you have intuitive individuals. They like abstractions, they like to be creative, have a tendency sometimes to be a bit impatient, and definitely like theory oriented rather than practical oriented. We also have judging, which is very time oriented and structured, perceiving, spontaneous and flexible, and also what you have with analytical versus global learners, meaning do you break things down one piece at a time, or do you like to look at things holistically as one big whole? Again, all of these different learning styles, none of them are better than the rest, and one might not fit you exactly. Oftentimes what you'll find is you have a tendency to be a mixture of multiples. We also have what we like to call visual learners. If you're a visual learner, you're probably looking at this presentation right now and not necessarily listening to a lot of what's going on as I speak, because you have a tendency to be a little bit more visual. Visual learners need to see, to visualize, to work or learn. Okay? Have a tendency to read each chapter first, look at visual aids, highlight key points, focus on the lecture, take notes, make your own visuals, okay? No other distractions around. And in order to be successful, keep your study area free of clutter. On the other hand, if you think you may be an auditory learner, these are some characteristics that may describe you a little bit. Auditory learners have a tendency to need to hear in order to work and learn. They're very active listeners. Hearing a part of what's going on is absolutely imperative to their learning. So right now, rather than reading every word on the screen, maybe you're listening to the words that I'm speaking. Okay? Many auditory learners are going to take written notes. They'll tape lectures. That way they have the opportunity to go back in and listen to them later. And they'll read their notes out loud. They have a tendency to use recordings of assigned readings, study out loud with a friend, and to cut out distractions. Again, or if you're starting to see a little bit of a pattern here, cutting out distractions is really important for active learning. Now, while visual learners and auditory learners have a tendency to kind of be what we think of more often than not when we're considering active learning, tactile and kinesthetic learners are also out there. And it's very important to acknowledge the fact that tactile and kinesthetic learning is a very, very important aspect of learning for many individuals, because this is the one learning style that has a tendency to be overlooked, not only by instructors, but also by those of you that are students as well. You need to do in order to learn. You have to touch, move to process. If you think back to when you were a kid, if you were one of those kids in kindergarten that was constantly fidgeting in your chair and trying to get up and had a really hard time focusing because you felt like you need to be doing something as well, you may be a tactile and or kinesthetic learner. Okay? These individuals have a tendency to write. They rewrite and summarize. They'll choose lab courses and internships where they can be actively engaged. Move around while studying. This might be somebody that is walking around with a book in hand and just pacing back and forth while they read. Okay, tape your notes and listen while doing something. If you're a tactile and kinesthetic type learner, it might be good for you to tape your lectures and then go work out at the gym and listen to it back. Okay, you have a tendency to use your fingers or props. Maybe you talk with your hands a lot. Maybe you pull things out that can enhance the discussion that you're having. These are all kind of different aspects of tactile and kinesthetic learners. Now, along with the different learning styles, we also have what we call multiple intelligences. Okay, this doesn't mean we have many different brains by any means, but what it does mean is that there are several different forms of intelligences that we possess. You have linguistic intelligence, which is the ability to use language to think and communicate. Okay, so spoken communication. Spatial intelligence, the ability to use images that represent special relations. This is actually seeing it. Okay, so no words are necessary. We have an image. We're able to understand a communicated message. Logical, mathematical intelligence. This is the ability to think logically and to solve mathematical problems. And this is one of those where you're taking an algebra class in high school. And when am I ever going to use it? Well, actually you use math on a daily basis. And that's a part of your logical and mathematical intelligence. Bodily and kinesthetic intelligences, which is the ability to learn and to move. Okay, think motor skills connected to this type of intelligence. And then, of course, interpersonal intelligence. That's the ability to communicate and engage in effective social relationships with others. These are your interpersonal skills. Now, intrapersonal, not to be confused with interpersonal, is the ability to understand oneself, whereas interpersonal has to deal with your interactions with other people outside yourself. Interpersonal is kind of what's going on in your own head. Okay, then we have musical intelligence. That's sensitivity to and understanding of pitch, rhythm, other aspects of music. And then, of course, naturalistic, the ability to identify patterns in nature and to determine how individual objects or beings fit into them. to you? Well, you need to be an active learner in your everyday life in order to be successful, period. But for this class specifically, we're going to be focusing on how it can help you in the classroom. And there are some particular academic behaviors of active learners that can make you more successful. Attend class. Unless you absolutely have to miss, make sure you're there. Be on time. Recognize essential class sessions. Whenever you walk into a classroom and you realize that the information seems to be very important, make sure that you're even more engaged than usual. Preview your textbook. If you look ahead, this can help give you an idea of what's coming. That way you're not completely confused when new concepts are hit on in class. Read assignments before class. Sometimes it can be a little bit confusing when the instructor's going over assignments. We're not always absolutely 100% clear on what we want. In our heads, it sounds clear. It doesn't necessarily transfer clearly to all of you as students because we don't all think the same way. So if you have the opportunity to read your assignments before class, that can really make the learning process in the classroom go a lot smoother for you and the instructor as well. Review your lecture notes. It is helpful to take notes because as you listen, when you turn to write, you're engaging in two different types of muscle memory. Okay, and so that can be helpful in and of itself. But whenever you go back through and you review the notes that you've written, once again, you're just giving yourself that extra step to commit that information to memory. Use a tape recorder, particularly if you're an auditory learner. If you can record your class sessions, you can go back and listen to them later. Pass the first test. Make it a priority. Don't think that you can miss the first test, fail it, and that's okay. You'll make it up later. That's just something that you can't do. You really need to tackle that first test with confidence. Network with other students. It's very important that you establish relationships with the other people in your groups and in your classes. Form a study group. If you have difficulty studying for tests or exams, get with some other people and they can help you study successfully. Learn from others. Oftentimes we have a tendency to think that we're the only one that really knows what we need to do, what's going to be successful. But oftentimes there's great learning opportunities with other people as well. And of course, collaborate. This goes back to forming your study groups, talking to your instructor, working with other people. Really just engage in any kind of activities that you can in order to make yourself successful.